Good evening, and welcome to another weekly edition of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I'm Ryan Roberts, and these are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Miss Shelley Pruitt. Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I don't know why I said.
What have you been watching before we
tongue-tied.
started?
I got tongue-tied. Paranormal.
Hold on, what? No, we're going into what were you watching before we got going?
Into this.
Don't worry about it.
We've only been doing it for like 160 plus episodes.
I know, man. I got tongue-tied. Hey, it happens. How are you?
I don't know what show you were just watching. I mean, no, I know we were talking about the party and everything, but come on now.
He was watching that one that starts, like there's a ghost in this house that I need exorcised. Can you help me?
Exorcised?
Are y'all both on crack tonight? What is your deal?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, for those for those inquiring minds, I did not get married this weekend, even though I got proposed to. Go watch the Patreon.
Yes.
Oh my God. Anyway. Oh Lord,
check it out.
Mercy.
We're doing good to answer your question, Ryan.
Yes,
thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Still unmarried, still single.
Still unmarried, still single. Hey, me too. It's all good. Well, guys, tonight we're kind of going to jump into this really quick. I want to go ahead and give a disclaimer up front. This one is going to be pretty freaking rough. It's a true crime case, and they often are rough, but this one has a lot of abuse in it. And if you're very sensitive to that sort of thing, I'm just going to go ahead and warn you up front, because as we get into this, it gets worse and worse until there is a resolution.
Child abuse.
Yes, child abuse, domestic abuse, all kinds of stuff. It gets worse and worse until we get to a resolution at the end. And even then, you might still not be happy with that resolution. So I'm just going to go ahead and warn you up front. So as we get into this, if you are in any way sensitive, you are forewarned before we get started.
Yeah. And if my earphones come out, I'll be back with you in a minute.
Because the woman we are talking about tonight is an absolute monster, and her name is Gertrude Baniszewski. And just get ready, buckle up.
I've never heard of her until you brought her to our attention. So it was when you said that name, you're like, oh, I'm going to cover this. Like of course I do all the stuff extra for the podcast, right, the marketing and stuff. So I had to look into her a little bit. Yeah, this is.
Yeah. I had not heard of her either until I was at the bookstore, and I found a book called Torture Mom by Ryan Green that is very, very good. And I recommend you go pick that up, because it goes into more detail that I could not bring myself to go into, because it gets real bad. Okay. And I kind of doctored it up a little bit to where it's not as bad, but it's still going to be bad.
You cleaned it up, yeah.
All right.
Well,
so
let's get going then.
Let's see how far I make it then.
All right. So Gertrude Baniszewski was born Gertrude von Fossen in Indianapolis, Indiana on September the 19th, 1929.
Oh.
To a doting, loving father. Yeah, she don't look good. To a doting, loving father and a cold, callous, cruel mother. So naturally, she gravitated towards her father, and she became a bona fide daddy's girl. She spent every moment she could with her father, garnering most of his attention and forming an extremely close bond with him, which caused her siblings to resent her and her mother to become extremely jealous and hate her. Whenever her father would leave the house, her mother would completely ignore her unless she was barking orders at her or admonishing her for some perceived slight. Some unperceived slight that she unknowingly committed. Her mother also made it a point to treat her siblings way better than she did her, and purposely make Gertrude feel like an outsider. She even tried to turn her siblings against Gertrude and cause them to be mean or indifferent towards her. But poor Gertrude only wanted to be loved. So when her father came home, she jumped for joy and couldn't wait to spend time with the one person who truly loved her. But when Gertrude turned 10, her life would take a drastic turn, and she would lose the one thing she cared about most in this world, which would have a profound effect on her for the rest of her life. One evening, after a family dinner, Gertrude sat with her dad at the kitchen table. He was listening to her read aloud from one of her books, and as she read, he grinned from ear to ear. He was so proud of her and loved to hear her read. When she finished, he clapped his hands in approval and made a bad dad joke. about not remembering what she had just read, and Gertrude and her dad laughed at the dumb joke. But suddenly her dad made a weird face, which made her laugh harder. The only thing was, her father had stopped laughing. His eyes had begun to bug out of his skull, and suddenly he lurched forward in his chair and smacked his head on the corner of the kitchen table. As he dropped like a sack of potatoes, Gertrude screamed and went to the floor to check on him. As she got over to his body, a pool of blood formed underneath his head, and he began to convulse and writhe. Gertrude's mother heard all the commotion and ran in to see her husband jerking violently on the floor. She screamed and ran over to try to revive him by smacking him in the face and calling his name. Gertrude tried to get his attention too, desperately trying anything she could to bring him back. But her mother looked at her with anger and contempt in her eyes and bellowed, "What did you do to him?" Gertrude tried to tell her what happened, but her mother was having none of it. So Gertrude backed away from her mother and asked, "Should I call the doctor?" Her mother snapped at her, "Do you have doctor money?" The stinging tears began to run down her cheeks. She just wanted her dad to be okay. Now, by this time, Gertrude's siblings had sensed something was very wrong and came into the kitchen. Upon seeing their father on the floor, they began to cry. And Gertrude's mother got up and comforted the other children, but left Gertrude on the floor to hold her dead father's body until his heart stopped beating and the warmth left his body. And just like that, the only person that ever loved her was gone.
Well, her mother sounds like a big piece of shit. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just going to go ahead and say it.
She's pretty terrible. And that's and more often than not in cases like this, it starts at home. It starts with the parents.
It's cyclical, right?
Mm-hmm. And so she kind of really holds on to this the rest of her life. Now, the next 3 years for Gertrude were an absolute nightmare. Her mother completely ignored her until she was blaming Gertrude for the death of her father or any other small thing that she could think of, to the point where even her siblings began to blame her and ignore her as well. And as a result of all the trauma, Gertrude began having terrible night terrors that would wake up the rest of the family. And when she woke them up, her mother would beat her for disturbing their sleep. The poor girl had no one. But when she hit puberty, all the boys in school began to pay attention. And the poor attention-starved girl absolutely reveled in the attention she received at school.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Sure.
Do you know what happened to her father?
I didn't see it. He just had some sort of, I would assume a heart attack or something.
Probably like a heart attack.
Yeah, and then like
you know what it sounds like a brain aneurysm.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like a brain aneurysm when it's just so quick.
And then
then
by hitting his head could have caused a seizure with it. But they never said because they didn't have doctor money. That is so callous.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and blamed her for it. What did you do to him? Yeah, instead of what happened.
Like a 10-year-old can do anything that would have caused that, right? Okay.
Right. And then like I don't think the coroner ever said anything because, like I said, they didn't have doctor money. They had to have a doctor come out to the house back then. So
yeah,
a lot of times we don't know what happened to those people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she absolutely reveled in the attention she was receiving at school. She was just happy that someone wanted to be in her company. But as we all know, when puberty hits, boys and girls do the things that boys and girls do, and in no time, Gertrude had a reputation around town as someone easy to fool around with. But all she was looking for was love and acceptance. But these boys, weren't it. So Gertrude began looking for something more steady, because by the time she was 16, her mother had become unbearable. She latched onto an 18-year-old police deputy named John Baniszewski. And after a few months of dating, the two were married. The wedding was very small and only attended by John's family. Gertrude had no friends to invite, and she damn sure didn't want her family to attend. So, they had a nice little ceremony and a brief honeymoon in Ohio. Woohoo. When they returned.
Hey, that's the honeymoon capital of the world. You leave Ohio alone.
Oh, man.
That's what I'm just going to put at the end of my invitations for the next wedding. It's just like, if you could contribute to our honeymoon in Ohio, we would greatly appreciate it.
Welcome to beautiful Cleveland.
Anyways,
Cleveland rocks. Leave it alone.
So when they returned, they bought a beautiful little house in the Indianapolis suburbs and settled into marital bliss. Or so it would seem. For the next 10 years, Gert would again succumb to the whim of someone who was absolutely jealous, just like her mother. Things started off well enough. Gertrude made John sandwiches for lunch and dropped them by the police station daily. But Gertrude couldn't cook, and over time it really annoyed John. What kind of woman couldn't cook, he thought. Gertrude also had issues in the bedroom. Despite her reputation, she didn't know much about sex. She was actually rather uncomfortable with the act altogether. And this frustrated John to no end, and he let it be known, which only caused her to further withdraw and feel bad about herself. So when she felt like she had to perform her marital duties, she would dissociate and go into a catatonic state until John was done. But from these awful lovemaking sessions, the couple sired 4 children. And Gertrude put all of her love and affection into those kids, which caused John to become jealous. So John began to beat Gertrude for every perceived slight and minor annoyance, such as being too loud, looking at him funny, or just plain annoying him. But despite his regular beatings, she endured because she liked her life and wanted her children to have a good life. However, there was an incident that finally made Gertrude act. One of John's favorite punishments was to beat Gertrude about her head and face, which caused her numerous head injuries and left her dizzy and disoriented for days. So there's the head injury connection too. She made a big decision. No matter how good her life was, this was not worth it. She could no longer allow this to happen. She deserved better and she knew it. So the next time John got into one of his moods and tried to hit her, she told him she was divorcing him. Much to her surprise, it stopped him dead in his tracks. And by the next week, she had the papers, granting her a divorce, the house, and 100% custody of the kids. And she told John to hit the bricks. But Gertrude wasn't alone for long. She got out and about and met an unemployed but charming drunk named Edward Guthrie.
I'm sorry, that description made me giggle.
I mean, that always happens.
I've known quite a few charming unemployed drunks.
He and Gertrude dated for a few months and in no time tied the knot. But after the wedding, things began to go downhill pretty quickly. John was still sending Gertrude child support. But more often than not, Eddie would intercept the checks and blow them on booze. He was also not very nice to her children, and he became openly hostile towards them. One night, in a drunken stupor, he decided it was a good idea to hit one of the children that pissed him off. And for his efforts,
you better back the fuck up.
Right. And for his efforts, he found himself waking up in the ditch outside with a giant lump on the back of his head.
Good. As he should. Don't touch my kid.
He never knew what happened. He just woke up in the ditch after he whooped his ass. But
good.
Said from then on out, he knew Gertrude wasn't playing when it came to her children. So even though he despised her children, he kept his hands to himself. But despite his awfulness, Gertrude did actually seem to love him and encouraged him to do better. But that didn't work. But when that didn't work, Gertrude found herself a new motivator. She realized that she could use sex to get him to fall in line. So for about 3 months, she used sex to get him to quit drinking, be pleasant to her children, and eventually get off his ass and go get a job. But while she may have had good intentions, it ended up backfiring and blowing up in her face. Because as soon as he got a job and got a little bit of cash, Eddie went and filed for divorce, citing that, quote, the children annoyed him. Gertrude was absolutely furious, but thought good riddance to bad rubbish and just let him go.
Yeah, let him go.
Yeah, he sounds like a real winner.
Yeah, the kids bother me. You knew I had kids when you started dating me.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, well, I mean, what did you think was going to happen? You're going to move in and they were going to be quiet? No, they're kids.
They're kids.
So really nothing up to this point of her actions are hinting at anything coming down the line further on. It's things that are happening
She's been targeted by her mother because her mother was jealous.
Her mother and her lovers have just absolutely...
And
messed her up.
At this point, remind me. So she was 16 when she got married to the first one. She's had 4 kids by this point. She's around.
She's at least 22.
20s.
She's in her mid. She's in her mid to early 20s at this point.
Early to mid 20s. Okay, all right.
But so the only really thing we've seen as far as violence goes, is in defense of her children, which I'm all for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you ain't lying.
Yeah, because she seems to be kind of a punching bag for everybody else. She just seems to kind of take it when it comes to
her
her
kids. Up until now, she's all right, even though she's had a head injury from some other stuff. Okay, yes. Up until now, she's not been.
But you will not be so sympathetic later.
Oh, Lord, okay.
I say, but with Eddie gone, Gertrude became lonely and depressed. But one day, she was out in the neighborhood and bumped into her first husband, John. They had a conversation, and both of them got that old-time feeling. So she invited John over for dinner. And dinner went so well, John moved back in a few weeks later. And the couple actually ended up getting remarried. And this go-around, they really gave it the old college try. And everything went great for about a year. Until Gertrude became pregnant and miscarried very late in the process. Mm-hmm. After that, things went downhill again. Gertrude became very depressed, and the house became unkempt, and dinner stopped appearing on the table. So John became angry and frustrated, and began to hit Gertrude again. She took the beatings regularly, and when they didn't come on good days, she even would pick at John until he flew into a rage and beat her again. She felt like she deserved the beatings because in her mind, she was a bad wife. And she should have been able to carry her child to term. So anything John did to her, in her mind, she deserved as punishment for her failure. Which is terrible, but
it's a horrible.
Yeah, it's awful. Yeah, but she's not had any healthy relationships up to this point, so she's internalizing,
Yeah.
Well, and her loving partner after she loses a baby is like, why isn't the house clean? Get up off your ass and clean it yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your legs ain't broke. Your hands ain't broke.
Well, because let's be honest, I mean, that's what a woman goes through whenever. Those are the thoughts a woman has whenever she has a miscarriage. They go through her head, why couldn't I care? I mean, get off your ass and help your fucking wife.
How about you be supportive and be there for her like you're supposed to be, and not, start beating the crap out of her.
Yeah, because they're going to go through some stuff that you have no clue even remotely how to understand.
And you should just be there to help if you can.
She should have chunked old John's ass right back outside like she did the old Eddie. Adios, Eddie. Adios, John. Bye, John. You go the same direction Eddie goes.
But just as she was at her lowest, she received news that she was pregnant again, which caused her to rebound and return to being her old self. She began keeping a tidy house and cooking like she used to, which greatly pleased John. But eventually she would miscarry and the cycle would start all over again.
Oh, God.
So after 2 more children in 7 years and multiple miscarriages, John is the one that filed for divorce this time. And he left. Now, after John left the second time, Gertrude was 37, had 6 kids, and no income. So she was staring down the barrel of foreclosure and eviction from her home. And she needed to act fast. Her time with Eddie had taught her a few things about using sex to get what she wanted. So she looked for someone she could use and found that person in Dennis Wright, who was a married man 10 years her junior. She began messing around with Dennis and rewarding him with sex. But eventually, Dennis's wife found out and moved out. And the day after she left, Gertrude and her children moved in. And Dennis began to carry the economical burden of his newly acquired prefabricated family. As soon as the Baniszewskis moved in, things around the house began to decline. Gertrude refused to clean up after herself and let her children run wild. They would just throw old food and garbage into the floor and leave it. Dishes piled up in the sink, and his formerly beautiful home began to smell. But the final straw came when one of her children almost choked to death on a piece of trash that was left in the floor. Dennis knew right then and there that he had to get out of there. If he didn't, this woman would ruin his life. Plus, he didn't want kids. And there were now 6 under his roof.
Jesus.
So he made plans to slip away and leave it all behind.
Wait, do we know why she suddenly, like, that switch flipped?
I don't know. I think she's unstable, and I think it just did. I have no idea.
Well,
Okay,
it's probably
that seems
more
like
or
a
less
big shift. How that seems like a big shift to me, to have been gotten back into the routine of being, this mother and this wife, and even though she's moved in with Mr. Right.
Well, the thing,
why would it all just suddenly go bad? We don't know anything about him. We don't know.
So I think
could she have been having a very bad bout of postpartum after? I mean, she's had.
have.
I mean, how old was the youngest child when they moved in? Do we know?
I don't know. I don't know how old the youngest child
I was just
was.
wondering if she might have been suffering from some kind of postpartum depression, that literally her mood couldn't been stabilized, and that was just how she coped, was by shutting down.
Well, the thing is too is, at this point she's 37. She's got 6 kids. She felt very undesired at this point. So I think maybe that had something to do with it. I mean, she did move in with Mr. Right, but I think that maybe she is still in her mind, her mind's not completely healthy. She's thinking, hey, I'm 37. I've got 6 kids. Who's going to want me now? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think maybe that's why. And so she just kind of just like threw it all away and was just like, what the hell with everything, and just kind of let everything fall apart. But I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, it's just old things could resurface. I mean, she's gone through a divorce, 2 miscarriages, or several divorces, 2 miscarriages. Now she has 6 children, as Ryan was saying, and she's probably like, shit, this is just another notch in the belt. Another one has left. Here's this guy that says he wants me and can give me, financial freedom. So,
and again, this is interesting. Again, it's, I don't want kids.
Yeah,
that's now the second one that's told her that. Fast Eddie, and then this one.
Well, and then
Mr. Right.
Well, and that could also have something else to do with it as well. I mean, maybe we don't know. Maybe he said something to her that was a trigger. I mean, Lord knows that any victim is going to have some type of PTSD.
Right. Absolutely.
That they're not going to be aware of back then. So, I mean, that could have been a trigger for it, and could have just,
Yeah. I mean, and I'm pretty sure he's not very careful with his words, because look, he's cheating on his wife with somebody, and she finds out about it. He's like, okay, bye, and y'all move in. So,
yeah.
But that switch does flip back, because the day he planned to disappear, he came home to a completely different world. As he walked into the madhouse that had become his home, everything was spotless and peaceful. There was no garbage in sight, and the symphony of screaming children were silent. He couldn't believe his eyes and ears. He had to do a double take to make sure he was even in the right house. He gingerly stepped down the hallway and into the kitchen, where he found Gertrude singing and cooking a lavish meal. She turned around and didn't look like she had previously. She was not the bedraggled woman that had been moping around his house. She looked absolutely gorgeous. She welcomed him home and told him to sit, and served him the home-cooked meal. The whole time,
if I was him, I would be worried, because
I was that's where my head was going with all of this.
So the whole time he ate, she stared at him longingly, and when he was done, she sat across his lap and said, "I've been so awful to you, and I want to make that up tonight." Dennis knew exactly what that meant, and all the plans he had of leaving flew out the window. Gertrude led him down to the bedroom, and soon they were in the throes of passion. And as they lay there afterwards in a heap of sweat, she, in not so many words, told Dennis that she was pregnant, and they needed to discuss their future. Dennis backed up and screamed, "I don't want any babies." And Gertrude said, "Well, you should have thought about that before." Before she could finish that sentence, a closed fist nailed her in the cheek, drawing blood. Then a second caught her in the eye, hard enough to make her head snap back. Dennis used this opportunity to climb on top of her and rain fists down upon her belly. As she begged him to stop and screamed, "Not the baby, not the baby." Dennis got tired and, satisfied with his efforts, got up from the bed and left her laying in a pool of blood. Dennis had gotten his wish. Gertrude ended up losing the baby, and again fell into a deep depression. But despite the way she felt, she again fell back on the lessons her second husband had taught her. All she had to do was turn on the charm, and she could have exactly what she wanted. So instead of letting things go to pot, she continued to keep a clean house, with hot food on the table, and crawl into bed with Dennis anytime he wanted. So not too long after the failed pregnancy, she became pregnant again and had a little boy she named Dennis Jr. But when she got out of the hospital, she found that Dennis had skipped town, leaving her and the children to fend for themselves. She was so distraught that she had a nervous breakdown and quit eating. She went from looking put together to being a gaunt skeletal shell of her former self, kind of like the picture that you showed earlier.
Yeah, I'll put that back up.
People could tell that she was hurting. So several came by to visit and asked her if she was okay. She said she was, and concocted a story about how Dennis didn't leave her, but she concocted a story about him dying and her becoming a widow. Everyone knew that wasn't true, but the neighbors felt bad for her and passed on odd jobs to help her get by and bring her back down to earth. But nothing really did, and Gertrude remained completely unhinged.
Jesus.
While Gertrude had been going through all of her trials and tribulations, she leaned on her oldest daughter, Paula, for emotional support. And instead of having a mother-daughter relationship, they had more of a friendship type relationship. Paula, having to listen to her mom's struggles, kind of got a warped sense of what a relationship was and should be. So her dating life greatly suffered, and it caused her not to make the best decisions. Also, with her mom being completely checked out, Paula sort of became the head of the household, and the Baniszewski home became the place to be for all of the local teenagers. It was a place they could all hang out and smoke and listen to records, because there was little to no adult supervision. Gertrude had sequestered herself to the bedroom, but when she did come out occasionally, she played along with what the kids were doing and portrayed herself as an easygoing, cool mom who let kids do whatever they please. But with teenagers and their raging hormones going completely unsupervised, certain things began to happen that Gertrude definitely would not approve of. And soon her daughter would find out just how much her mother would disapprove. One day, while all the kids were hanging out, Paula began to eye a boy about a year younger than herself. So she grabbed him by the hand and led him into her bedroom. Her urges were getting the better of her. She wasn't even thinking about her mother lurking around the corner. So she closed the door and took her date to her bed. And just as her and her date were mid-makeout session, Paula's door flung open and Gertrude's shrill voice echoed in the room as she screamed, "Sinners!" Surprised, Paula jumped off the boy. But the next thing she knew, her mother had her by the hair, dragging her around the room and calling her a filthy whore. Gertrude then turned her attention to the boy and chased him out of the house and into the street. She then removed every single internal door in the house and had her boys chop them up for firewood. She thought it would teach Paula a lesson, but it didn't, because Paula was going to get what she wanted come hell or high water. So she began to sneak out and frequent local bars, eventually meeting a man 30 years her senior who wound up getting her pregnant. And still,
good God.
And he still went back to his wife.
How old is Paula at this point?
Like 16. Jesus. Yeah, so this dude, this dude is not a good person.
Yeah.
Leaving her to tell her mother and to raise the child alone. Paula and Gertrude had the tough conversation, and when the doctor confirmed Paula's pregnancy, Gertrude descended even further into madness. This is just another blow for Gertrude. She just keeps on, the hits keep coming for her. She couldn't believe that her daughter had made the same mistake that she did, and it pushed her to the breaking point. She began to forbid the children do housework, and when they did, she chased them out of the house. If they tried to get her to eat, she shouted them down until they quit. She felt she didn't deserve a clean house or to eat regularly. She deserved to exist in filth and squalor, and that's the way she wanted it. Paula dealt with her mother's breakdown, but one day needed to get away from the house for a few hours, and she went over to her friend Darlene McGuire's house. When she got there, Darlene introduced her to two teenage girls that she had found roaming the streets, named Sylvia and Jenny Likens. Paula and Sylvia were about the same age, and Sylvia's sister Jenny was a few years younger, but the first thing Paula noticed about Jenny was her leg braces. So Paula asked Jenny why she had them, and Jenny told her that she had a bout of polio as a kid, so she needed to wear the leg braces to have her legs work and walk. Paula understood, but what she didn't understand was why the two girls were walking the street. Sylvia told Paula that her mom and dad had had a fight, and her mom snuck them out in the middle of the night, and all three got on a Greyhound bus and came to Indianapolis. But when they got off of the bus, they were hungry. However, their mom had spent all of their money on bus tickets. So they found a supermarket and stood across the street while their mother went inside to steal some food. But while they were waiting, a police car pulled up in front of the store, and they watched their mom get hauled off in a pair of handcuffs. So they ran and were wandering the street when Darlene found them. Paula felt bad for them, and seeing as they had nowhere to go, Paula took them back to her house and told Gertrude their story. So Paula asked if the girls could stay the night. Gertrude said of course they could stay. Jenny felt a little uneasy, but she and her sister thanked Gertrude, and Gertrude told the girls that they could call her mom, because that's what all the other kids in the neighborhood called her. The Likens girls laughed uneasily and said, "Thanks, Mom," and went into the other room with Paula. Now, Darlene went home, and Paula and the Likens girls settled in for the evening. And as they drifted off to sleep. But in the morning, were awoken by someone pounding on the door. It was the girl's father, Lester Likens. Darlene had told him where to find his daughters, and he went straight to the Baniszewski home. Sylvia and Jenny were happy to see their father, but the news he had would be not so happy. He thanked Gertrude for taking care of his girls and explained that he had come by because he got a phone call that the girl's mother had been arrested. He was going to get her out of jail. However, he and she had been offered a job with a traveling carnival. It was a good job opportunity, but they couldn't bring the girls with them. So he asked Gertrude if he sent her $20 a week, could she take care of Sylvia and Jenny? Gertrude agreed and said she would be happy to, and Lester thanked her again and hugged his girls and left. Paula told the girls they were going to be like sisters, and everything seemed to be okay for a bit. The girls fell in line with the rest of the children and began going to church and school. But one afternoon they came home, and that's when the Likens girls' hell began. It was particularly quiet in the house that afternoon. The loud sounds and familiar sight of neighborhood kids were nowhere to be found. So the girls shrugged and went into their bedroom, but when they went in, Paula and Gertrude were waiting on them. Mother and daughter jumped up and grabbed Sylvia and forced her face down into a pile of dirty clothes. They also forced Jenny down beside her. Gertrude produced a wooden stirring spoon and went to town repeatedly beating their backsides with the wooden spoon, yelling the entire time about how their no-good father didn't pay the $20 he promised, and if he doesn't pay, his daughters get beat. And when she was done beating the girls, she threatened to do it again the next day if the money didn't come. She also threatened to pimp them out until she got what she was owed. And after that, she left the room with Paula in tow, and the sisters laid there and cried. What had they gotten themselves into?
How old are these kids? How old are these kids?
Like I said, Sylvia is like 16, like Paula, I believe, and I think Jenny is 14, I believe, 13 or 14 at this point. Yeah. Okay. And this is the type of person.
I just needed a point of reference.
This is the type of person they're dealing with. The next morning, the girls limped to school in severe pain, and while they were at school, the check from their father came in the mail. So there was no beating that night. As the girls went on living with Gertrude, it became more and more obvious food was going to be scarce. So the Likens sisters began picking up soda bottles and turning them in for extra money, so they could eat just a little something. One day, they collected enough to buy some candy at the store. They ate it as they were walking home, but Jenny, being the sweetheart she was, said they should save some for the other kids. So when they got home, they handed the candy out to the other children, but Gertrude caught them and accused them of stealing it. Sylvia tried to tell her that they bought it, but Gertrude didn't give her time to explain. She grabbed Sylvia and dragged her into Paula's room. and threw her down in the pile of dirty clothes. She pulled out the dreaded wooden spoon and started beating the crap out of Sylvia, calling her a thief and a liar with every single blow. She looked at Jenny and told her to tell the truth, but Jenny hesitated. And Gertrude screamed, "Answer, you lying little bitch." Jenny just wanted to save her sister, so she said they stole it to get Gertrude to quit. Gertrude screamed, "I knew it," and grabbed Sylvia by the hair. She yanked it as hard as she could so Sylvia would look into her eyes, and screamed at her, "If you ever lie to me again, it will be the last thing you do. Do you hear me, you filthy little bitch?" Sylvia let out a yes through gritted teeth, and Gertrude left the room. Jenny ran to hold her sister as Sylvia sobbed, "I just wanted to do something nice." So yeah,
not as sympathetic towards this bitch anymore.
No, she just the switch flips and she just starts beating the shit out of these girls she's supposed to take care of. After the candy incident, the Likens sisters tried to stay out of Gertrude's way and fade into the background, which seemed to work for a while. But that all changed one night when the sisters and Baniszewski children attended a church function. Reverend Julian had laid out a buffet for the participants and noticed the Liken girls had lost a considerable amount of weight since they had been coming around. So he had them eat some food, which they were happy to do, because it had been 3 days since they had last eaten. Sylvia ate but was careful not to stuff her face, because she didn't want to draw too much attention to herself. And when they left, Reverend Julian gave them each a piece of chocolate cake, and the girls were happy to get such a treat as they left the church. The girls went home and Sylvia put Jenny to bed. But all the Baniszewski children were hanging out in the living room and being loud. Sylvia couldn't sleep and heard the merriment in the living room, and she wanted to be a part of it. So she walked down the hall and into the living room, and much to her horror, Gertrude was sitting in the middle of her children, and everything went silent. Gertrude turned her attention to Sylvia and said, "Here comes the little piggy now." The youngest kids oinked at Sylvia, pleasing their mother and further humiliating Sylvia. Gertrude said, "Why are you so disgusting? Do you think no one would notice you stuffing your face, pig? Do you think my children have no eyes? Why do you want to shame me? Did you grow up in a pigsty nursing a sow?" Sylvia began to cry and said, "I didn't. I wouldn't." Gertrude snarled back, "So my babies and the priests are liars then. You disgust me. Are you hungry, Sylvia?" Just as Gertrude asked the question, Sylvia's stomach growled, betraying her in front of the deranged woman. Gertrude heard it and grabbed Sylvia and drug her into the kitchen and threw Sylvia into a chair at the table. Guys, this is going to get real rough. She went to the fridge and pulled out a cold hot dog and a stale bun. She put the two together and drowned the hot dog in ketchup and mustard until the condiments ran off the plate and into the floor. She slammed the hot dog down in front of Sylvia and said, "A meal for the poor starving Sylvie. Eat it up, you little bitch." Sylvia refused, but Gertrude rammed it into her mouth and told her how disgusting and fat she was, and how no man would ever want her fat body, and how everyone was laughing at her for being disgusting. Just then, Sylvia couldn't handle it anymore and got very nauseous. So she threw up the half of the hot dog she had already eaten. But as she vomited, Gertrude patted her on the back and told her if she ate the rest, she could be done. Sylvia thought, "Why is she rubbing my back? She just tried to force feed me a hot dog." But she was able to choke down the other half. Gertrude smiled and told her that she did great, but she still had to eat the rest. And she dumped Sylvia out of the chair and onto her hands and knees. And she stuck her foot between Sylvia's shoulder blades, forcing her face down in the puddle of vomit, which Gertrude made her eat. The entire time telling her she would be fat and alone forever. And after Sylvia was done, Gertrude pulled her to her feet and wiped her mouth clean. She told Sylvia she only did what she did because she cares. And if Sylvia would just be a good girl, all of the terribleness would be avoided. And she led Sylvia back to her bed and stroked her hair while she cried herself to sleep. Sylvia fell asleep wishing she was anywhere else. Yeah, so this... yeah. What do you think so far?
I wish a bitch would try.
Yeah. I have some real strong choice words for her. Like, I don't know, I'm going to take the plate and jam it right upside her fucking throat. Like,
I wish somebody would have, and I wish somebody would, and this story, as we get into it, like, the thing that bugs me about this story so much is, like, so many people had to have seen what was going on with these kids and did not help. I mean, because they're noticing they're losing weight. They're noticing that they're, like, becoming gaunt in appearance. They're noticing what's going on with them and how, like, the way they're acting, but no one bothered to, like, stick their nose in and be like, hey, what the hell's going on here?
But here's the thing, they're kids, and you never know what Gertrude was telling. Oh, they miss their parents. They're not eating, and I try to feed them, but they won't eat because they miss their parents. So you never know what's being said.
I think that we're dismissing. I think we're dismissing the times as well. You didn't pry.
Yeah, you didn't put your nose in other people's business.
Back then. Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't your family, if it wasn't your decision you were making, you didn't pry into other people's shit back then. So, yeah, people may have seen it going on and taking place, and they may have felt bad for them, or something, not realizing the gravity of the whole situation. But nobody's going to say anything. Back then, you would have select few, but. I mean, we're talking a whole different time.
And
I'd have implanted the bitch's face on the side of a brick wall. Like, I'm sorry. Like,
right. Like, I mean, she deserved to be in jail long before any of the. I mean, this is awful abuse that she did to these poor girls.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, the next week, the Likens' parents came to visit, but rather than allowing them to come by the house, which should be a fucking red flag, Gertrude arranged for them to meet her and the girls at a local park. When the Liken girls' mother Betty saw the girls, she was alarmed by their drastic weight loss. But Gertrude had a lie in the chamber ready for Betty. She told her that Paula was dieting, so the girls were doing the same in solidarity. But when Gertrude made up the lie about a special diet the girls were eating, Sylvia's face turned red and she began to tear up. Betty asked her what was wrong, but before she could say anything, Gertrude said Sylvia was just embarrassed because her new trim figure had drawn attention from the local boys. That explanation was good enough for her parents, so they gave Gertrude money and hugged their daughters goodbye. And Gertrude and the Liken girls got on the bus to go back home. Sylvia had to sit right next to Gertrude, and Gertrude stroked her hair and told her how good of a girl she was, and told her that she reminded her of herself at that age. And she told her that at that age, all the boys were after her, but she wouldn't let them get to Sylvia and ruin her. And now she and Sylvia will be the best of friends. And Sylvia knew these were lies, and that Gertrude was absolutely delusional. So, after the park visit, the Liken girls had a few good weeks. It seemed that since Gertrude could trust them now, her wrath had been momentarily quelled. Also, the girls were getting along better with Paula and the other eldest Baniszewski daughter, Stephanie. So Jenny and Sylvia began to frequent hanging out in the living room. But just when the girls were getting comfortable, Gertrude struck again. One day, the Likens and older girls were discussing their love lives. All of the other neighborhood kids were hanging out and hooting and hollering when the girls offered up details about who they had kissed and who they liked. Gertrude was also hanging out and listening. All the other girls had shared their stories, so Sylvia wanted to share hers. She talked about going steady with a boy back in her hometown, and how they kissed quite a lot, and how she even let him fill her up. All the kids approved, giving her oohs and ahs and clapping. Sylvia smiled and looked around the room at her approving public. But the one face she saw, twisted and gnarled, was Gertrude's. Gertrude jumped up out of her chair, put her finger in Sylvia's face, and yelled, "Whore!" Sylvia was so taken aback, she couldn't be a whore. She had never even had sex. Gertrude wasn't buying it, though. She shoved Sylvia in her chair. She shoved Sylvia back in her chair, and the chair toppled over backwards, causing Sylvia to hit her head on the wall. As she tried to get up, Gertrude stomped on her crotch, screaming about how everyone will know she is a whore when her belly begins to show. Sylvia lay there in pain, not knowing what to do. But before she could decide, Gertrude began kicking her in the crotch over and over again. Not wanting to deal with the pain, Sylvia closed her legs and tried to shield herself. But Gertrude screamed, "Too late for that. You should have kept your legs closed before it was too late, you filthy whore." And she commanded a couple of boys close by to grab Sylvia's legs and open them, saying she likes when boys spread her legs. Gertrude then stomped Sylvia's crotch again until she was tired and stopped. Sylvia curled up in the fetal position and writhed in pain, but eventually got off the floor and limped over to a chair. But just as she lowered her aching body into it, Gertrude pulled it away and Sylvia fell into the floor. Gertrude stood over her and got in her face and said, "Whores are unfit for chairs." The next day, Sylvia went to school and could barely sit in her desk because of the pain. As she sat there in pain, she got angry. So she devised a plan. She couldn't hurt Gertrude directly.
Oh, yeah, you can. Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But she could hurt Gertrude by hurting Paula and Stephanie. After all, they had been compliant in her torture. So Sylvia started a rumor about them around the school, saying that they were having sex for money. Jenny was told as well, and the sisters spread the rumor, and in no time the school was buzzing, and the Baniszewski girls heard the rumor as well. It wasn't hard to figure out who had started it, and Stephanie's boyfriend Coy was absolutely pissed about it. So when school was over, he raced to the Baniszewski house to tell Gertrude about the nasty rumor and to wait on the Likens girls to get home. A few moments later, the girls came in, and Coy backed Sylvia up against a wall and told her that he knew judo, and the next time she talked shit about Stephanie, he would personally mess her up. Gertrude took advantage of Coy's anger and said, "You're going to let her off with a warning? What kind of man are you?" So Coy turned around and punched Sylvia in the jaw. Sylvia went down like a sack of potatoes, but Coy picked her back up, and Gertrude smirked at him and said, "So, this is judo?" So Coy grabbed Sylvia by the arm and flipped her onto her back. He looked at Gertrude for approval, and she nodded. So he picked Sylvia back up and did it again, causing her to yelp in pain. Gertrude told him if he kept doing it upstairs, he may break something. So she pointed to the basement door and told him there was nothing to break down there. So Coy grabbed Sylvia by her hair and dragged her down to the basement. Gertrude followed and sat on the stairs, watching Coy slam Sylvia again and again onto the hard floor. Sylvia was in so much pain she lost track of how many times she was slammed. But Coy was done after a while, and he decided he was going to go back upstairs. And as he did, Gertrude grabbed him by the arm and told him that he could come by and practice his judo on Sylvia anytime he wanted to, because she deserved every beating that she got.
What a piece of shit woman.
Mm-hmm.
This woman who had been beaten on is now encouraging a teenage boy to beat on someone who is in her household and rewarding him for that.
Under her care.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You know, I think, I don't know. We'll talk about it later at the end. So Coy said okay and went upstairs. But Gertrude stayed to watch Sylvia as she writhed on the basement floor. She eventually got up and told Sylvia, "You stay here tonight," and turned out the light, leaving Sylvia all alone in the dark. Sylvia was allowed to come up the stairs the next day and return to school a few days later, but the torture never stopped. Coy would come by the house almost daily, and Gertrude encouraged him to practice his judo on Sylvia in the basement, which he did over and over and over, beating the poor girl to a pulp. But eventually Gertrude got bored with that and struck again. The Likens sisters again attended a church function, but when they got home, the house was packed with neighborhood teenagers. And in the middle of the madness was Gertrude. As Sylvia walked in the door, a friend of Stephanie's named Judy walked up to her and asked, "Why are you telling everyone that my mom was a hooker?" Sylvia, of course, hadn't said such a thing, but Gertrude told Judy that she did. So Judy slapped the taste out of Sylvia's mouth and cold-cocked her again. But Sylvia didn't fight back. She just calmly explained that she would never say something like that, and that someone was telling her that so that she would fight her. That explanation fell on deaf ears, though, because Judy reared back and kicked Sylvia in the shins. Sylvia still refused to fight back, so Judy got frustrated and left. But that wasn't good enough for Gertrude. She still wanted more. So her eyes darted around the room, and she locked eyes with Jenny and pointed at Sylvia and bellowed, "Hit her." But Jenny refused. She said she would not hit her sister. So Gertrude jumped out of her chair and slapped the piss out of Jenny and commanded her to hit her sister or she would starve her for a week. Jenny still refused. She just couldn't do it. So Gertrude slapped her so hard that her legs buckled. Sylvia screamed, "For God's sakes, just do it." So against every fiber of her being, Jenny made...
sorry for those who can't see what's happening. Shelly just turned sideways on the screen. We were trying to figure out what was going on. She'll be back momentarily.
She'll be back momentarily. Right? So Sylvia screamed, "For God's sake, just do it." And so against every fiber of her being, Jenny made a fist and punched Sylvia in the face, over and over until her knuckles were bruised, crying the entire time, while Gertrude watched and enjoyed every single second.
This fucking woman, man. Like...
I know.
I don't. Oh, I know we're going to talk about it here in a little bit, but where my brain's at right now is just like I don't understand where this switch happens. Where it's like,
right,
you are a survivor of this type of abuse, and you are now trying to be ringmaster for teenagers.
Right. You know, to me, it's like she is projecting her anger from Paula onto Sylvia. And even then, the extremity of the extreme nature of what she's doing is way over the top.
Yeah, this is just, I don't know if I've actually ever heard of a situation like this where it's like, this woman is the puppet master of
essentially,
the abuse, but she's not actually, other than the slapping and stuff like that in the food, she's not the one that's pummeling this girl.
No.
Over and over and over again.
She's making the other ones do it.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Shelly, what she missed is her sister ended up having to beat the crap out of her.
I figured.
Yeah. And so after her beating, Sylvia slunk back into her room, away from everyone, and cried herself to sleep. It was a little while before Sylvia caught Gertrude's wrath again. But the next time she did, it was because she needed something. It was starting to get cold outside, and PE classes were still being held outdoors. Sylvia only had shorts and a t-shirt, but the school required that she get a tracksuit. So she reluctantly asked Gertrude for a tracksuit. Gertrude told her no because whores don't need tracksuits. Sylvia insisted she needed it for school, and Gertrude said she could give a damn what Sylvia needs. So the next day at school, Sylvia went into the locker room and stole a tracksuit out of the lockers. She wasn't proud of it, but she did what she had to do. But she would soon pay the price for her new outfit. When Gertrude found it in the laundry, she cornered poor Sylvia and asked her how she got it. Sylvia didn't say a word. She knew it was futile. So Gertrude accused her of stealing it, and then accused her of prostituting herself for money to buy it. Gertrude grabbed her by the hair and threw her into the floor, and as Sylvia was on her back, Gertrude went back to one of her favorite physical attacks and began stomping Sylvia in the crotch again, to the point it felt like a red-hot poker was down there. But Gertrude continued to stomp, screaming at Sylvia, "Who did you fuck for the money?" Eventually, Sylvia couldn't take it anymore and curled up in the fetal position, trying to get the pain to stop. Gertrude quit stomping, but reached down and grabbed one of Sylvia's hands and uncurled Sylvia's clenched hand. And she said, "Only one cure for thieves." Gertrude took a cigarette from her mouth and pressed the hot end into each one of Sylvia's fingers, one by one, as Sylvia struggled to get away.
Jesus fucking Christ.
But Gertrude sat on top of her, keeping Sylvia in place as she was scorched by the red-hot ash. And with each burn, Gertrude giggled and said, "This is what you deserve." But Gertrude wasn't done. Several of the neighborhood kids were all in the living room, and Gertrude took Sylvia into the living room and in front of all the kids, pulled Sylvia's pants down and whipped her with a belt until her legs were all tore up from the merciless lashes of the leather strap. Gertrude then encouraged the kids to put their cigarettes out on Sylvia's bare flesh, to remind her how worthless she was and that stealing was wrong. And like clockwork, all the kids lined up and burned Sylvia with their lit cigarettes. Gertrude just watched and smiled.
What kind of fucking power does this woman have over these children?
I guess it's because that's the hangout spot, and we're not going to tell anybody what's going on at the hangout spot, so I think that's what the deal is with that. So, once the nightmare of the burns were over, Sylvia tried to stay out of the way for a while. But while she was trying not to draw attention, she began to notice things about her body. For instance, her lack of nutrition and constant battering had caused her to stop having her period, and was causing her body not to heal. The cigarette burns that covered her body were still not healing up to a week after the incident. And her bruises were not getting any better. She realized that she had to do something. She had to eat something or she would never get better. She was literally withering away. So she took matters into her own hands and went back to picking up soda bottles for food money. One night she snuck out and went collecting and got a good haul of bottles, just enough to buy her a full meal. She took her dinner to the park on a bench and ate it before going home. She reveled in the taste of the food. It was one of the few pleasures that she had had since she had been a prisoner in Gertrude's house.
This poor baby is in survival mode.
Yeah.
Yep. She finished up and went back home, hoping Gertrude was in bed and she could just sneak back in. Sylvia came in and went to her room, but as soon as she crested the door, Gertrude was there waiting. She grabbed Sylvia and dragged her into the living room where some of the neighborhood kids were hanging out. She threw Sylvia into the center of the room and accused her of being a, quote, street-walking whore. Gertrude then presented a large glass soda bottle and tossed it to Sylvia and told her to do something that I can't really talk about here. You have to read the book.
We can fill in with what she had
Sylvia
her do.
Was humiliated. She didn't want this. She was just hungry and wanted some food. Gertrude screamed at her, "Do it." Sylvia refused, but Gertrude forced her to do unspeakable things in front of everyone. And when it happened, in front of everyone, and that's when it happened. Sylvia yelped in pain and blood began to pour from her body. She passed out in pain, in the pain of what she had just endured, and Gertrude had the older boys carry her off to bed. The next morning, Sylvia woke up completely soaked. The soda bottle had broken something, and in the middle of the night, she peed the bed and expelled a good amount of blood and urine. She tried to get up and take her bedding to the washing machine before Gertrude noticed, but the pain was so great that she couldn't stand. So she tried to crawl through the house, but Gertrude caught her and told her she wasn't fit to live with humans anymore. She told her if she couldn't keep from pissing herself, she was lower than a dog, so she would have to go live in her kennel. Gertrude opened the basement door and kicked Sylvia down the stairs. Sylvia rolled down a few stairs and stopped, so Gertrude kicked her in the ribs until she rolled to the bottom. Sylvia lay in the dark in the basement until Gertrude came down that night to check on her. Sylvia had again wet herself. The soda bottle had messed her up. She begged for Gertrude's help. She knew something was terribly wrong. Gertrude just looked at her and called her filthy and said she would help her all right. So she called Coy and her son John Jr. to come downstairs and grab Sylvia. The boys grabbed Sylvia and hauled her upstairs to the bathroom, where they were instructed to dump her in a bathtub filled with scalding water. Sylvia screamed from the pain as the boys dunked her in, but Paula and the boys scrubbed her down, and once they were done, dumped her back in the basement. And from there on out, that's where she stayed. Unless Gertrude had her to go take a bath, or she came down with food for Sylvia, that she made Sylvia eat like a dog out of a bowl. Occasionally, she would come down with John Jr. and clean up the basement, where they picked up all the refuse on the floor with a garden trowel and forced Sylvia to eat it. Then Gertrude got the idea to give Sylvia an old coffee can to use as a toilet. And once a day, they would come down and make Sylvia drink the contents that were left in the can. the poor girl was being treated worse than an animal. After weeks in her basement hell, Gertrude came downstairs and got Sylvia. She told Sylvia if she could sleep in a bed and not piss in it, she could come back up and live with the other humans. So she had the boys pick her up and place the battered girl in a bed. But Sylvia couldn't make it all night. She was awoken by Gertrude screaming at her about pissing all over the bed. She grabbed Sylvia and yanked her out of bed and drug her into the living room. But when she realized none of the girls were present, she again made Sylvia do unspeakable things with a soda bottle. The poor broken girl barely reacted and did what she was told. She didn't even fight back, just solemnly and lethargically did it. And once she was done, Gertrude yelled at her again and told her to go get dressed. But Gertrude was still seething. As she stared at the broken girl, she devised another punishment. She got up and put her finger in Sylvia's face and screamed, "I didn't forget what you did. You branded my daughter's whores, and now I'm going to brand you." She told the boys to strip her down and make a gag out of her shirt. So they did, and they held her down. And while Gertrude heated up a sewing needle until it was red hot. As she sat down on Sylvia's hips, her and the boys drug the hot needle across Sylvia's stomach, carving in big bold letters, "I am a prostitute and proud of it."
Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Gertrude smiled at her handiwork and said, "What are you going to do now? Now no man is ever going to want you." Sylvia completely no-sold Gertrude's jab. She just sighed and said, "I guess nothing. It's there now." Gertrude had failed to get a rise out of Sylvia, and it ate Gertrude alive. So she threw Sylvia back down in the basement and sent Coy down there to throw her around and hurt her even more. The next day, Gertrude brought Sylvia upstairs and set her down at the kitchen table. She asked her if she wanted some food and gave her a half-burnt piece of toast. Sylvia tried to eat it and swallow it down, but couldn't swallow because her throat had become infected. She told Gertrude she couldn't swallow, so Gertrude said that she would help her, and pulled a curtain rod off the window and tried to ram it into Sylvia's mouth. But Sylvia clenched her jaw tight, which pissed Gertrude off even more. So Gertrude repeatedly rammed the rod into her teeth, screaming, "Take it, you bitch." Sylvia fell out of her chair and into the floor, and Gertrude ordered her son John Jr. to take Sylvia back to the basement. The next day, Coy and Gertrude went down to the basement to abuse Sylvia more. They woke her up, and Coy beat her with a curtain rod.
You know how much I want to beat him with a curtain rod right now? Do you know how much?
I know.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I mean, these are all horrible people complacent in this. They, compliant, not complacent. They woke her up and beat Coy, and beat her with a curtain rod until she was unconscious. Sylvia woke up in great pain later that night. She couldn't call for help because of her throat. So she felt around in the dark for anything she could find to make noise. She found an old shovel head and dragged herself across the floor over to the basement wall and beat the shovel head on the wall for hours, just trying to draw attention to herself so anybody would come help her. The noise of the spade woke several neighbors, but no one bothered to see what it was, and no one came to help her. The girl had used every bit of strength that she could muster and had nothing left to give. So right there in her own filth and blood and in the dark basement, Sylvia drew her last breath. Gertrude and Stephanie found her the next morning. Stephanie carried Sylvia's body to the bathtub and dumped her in. Steph didn't realize Sylvia was dead until Sylvia's body went under the water and no bubbles came up. Stephanie was very alarmed and tried to administer CPR, but it was no use because Sylvia was gone. Gertrude had her boys put Sylvia's body back in the basement and was going to have them take her body to the dump later on that night. But her plan in the moment was to call the cops and report Sylvia as a runaway. So when the body was discovered at the dump, there would be no suspicion on her. Gertrude went ahead and called the cops, and when they got to the house, she spun a tale about Sylvia running off with a gang of boys to go be a prostitute. The cops thought the whole thing seemed odd, but took a statement from Gertrude and turned around to leave. But as they were walking towards the door, Jenny whispered to one of the officers, Get me out of here and I will tell you everything.
Good job, Jenny. Good job, Jenny. Jesus.
The cops told Gertrude they would have to question everyone. So they grabbed Jenny and pulled her into her room. And Jenny immediately told them to check the basement. The officer went downstairs and there he discovered Sylvia. He ran upstairs and grabbed his partner, and everyone in the house was immediately under arrest.
Good.
Gertrude, Stephanie, Paula, John Jr., and Coy were all hauled off to jail. And everyone but Gertrude sang like a bird, giving the police every graphic detail. Sylvia's body was removed from the home, and the coroner performed an autopsy that evening. According to his report, Sylvia was covered in 100 second and third degree cigarette burns. Her throat was swollen shut, and she suffered extensive bruising, muscular, and nerve damage. She had also chewed through her lips in the last moment of life, and they were hanging on by a thread. But her cause of death seemed to be several brain hemorrhages that she had had in the basement. Also, there was no evidence that Sylvia had ever done what Gertrude accused her of doing. It was clear to everyone that Gertrude was the liar. All of the arrested Baniszewskis and their cohorts were held until the trial began. But the charges against Stephanie were dropped after she turned state's witness against the rest of them. Paula had her baby in the middle of the trial, but was convicted of second-degree murder. However, she was granted a second trial where she pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter and served 3 years in prison. John and Coy were convicted of voluntary manslaughter and served 18 months in juvie. Gertrude was sent to trial and still tried to paint Sylvia as a promiscuous girl that slept with the whole neighborhood, but the evidence didn't support her claims, and the jury sentenced her to life in prison.
Good.
However, she appealed, saying Indiana was a prejudiced environment, and the judge wouldn't let the case be relocated, so she was given a new trial, where she was only given 18 years in prison. After 18 years, she was paroled, and in 1985 went to live with Paula, where she died of lung cancer in 1990.
It was too good for her.
Too good for her. So
Did she serve the full 18 years?
She served the full 18 years, yes.
That was it for this little girl's life.
That's all she got was 18 years in prison.
I got an issue. Let me just step away.
Okay.
You're fine.
Yeah.
You're fine.
So, I mean, they should have stuck with the first conviction and threw her ass in prison for the rest of her fucking life, but she should have gotten the chair for what she did to this poor girl.
No, make her ass fucking rot like she did to that poor girl.
That's true.
Sit in a fucking jail cell for, a 3x5 foot cell and rot your entire life away, and then think about nothing but what you done. She's not. She's one of those women though that she probably doesn't give a shit.
No, she doesn't care.
And I get.
She became a model prisoner while she was in prison, and all the guards and prisoners oh, kindly old Gertrude. No, that woman was a fucking monster.
I am not gonna hold on, wait, Ryan, is that?
That's it. Yeah, that's it, man.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this has got to be one of the worst cases.
Oh yeah,
I have ever heard.
Yeah,
especially you. And you have this thing about picking these cases, dude, where they are rough, and dude, this has got to be the worst one.
It is, and as I got into the book, and the more I read, I was like, "Fuck, oh my god!" And I cleaned that up.
Yeah,
the book, it is way worse than what I told you.
You told us plenty. I couldn't have taken any more of that.
I cleaned it up. That book is way worse. And the story of but the thing is we don't sanitize history. This is exactly what happened. Yeah. And you have to know about these things so they don't happen ever again. And this woman should have been in jail long before any of that. And the fact that nobody bothered to go by the house, even her, it should have been a red flag when she told her parents, "No, don't come, meet us at a park. Don't come by my house." If I have my children staying somewhere, you best believe I'm going to go see where the hell they're staying at.
Oh yeah.
I'm not, and her parents just didn't, I don't know if they didn't care or if they were too wrapped up in each other to I don't know.
They trusted. They trusted someone. They trusted the wrong person.
Yeah, they trusted the wrong fucking one. But
and that's the thing I was saying earlier is that unfortunately, back in this, because we're talking, she got out, she served the 18 years, right? She got out in 1985.
85 and died of lung cancer in 90.
Okay, so we're talking that this is, let's just say 20 years prior to that, we're talking the mid 1960s at this point. People just did not interject themselves into other people's families during that time. I mean, but God damn, at some point,
almost worse was that she was encouraging these boys to go and do this to this girl. And these boys didn't have a problem with him. These boys being encouraged by kept doing it and took some kind of weird pleasure from it. Well, they had to go home to their own homes. So how do you do that to another human being and walk away and just be like, yeah, okay, I'm going home now?
I don't know.
How do you do that?
I mean, I know they're kids. I mean, but they do know right from wrong at this point. And I don't know.
That's my thing. It's just like, what fucking power did she have? I don't get. I get the whole hangout spot and everything like that, but Jesus Christ.
I wonder if it's because she was an adult and because she was in a position of authority. So maybe they thought in their mind it was okay to do what she was asking them to do.
I don't think anybody in their own mind thinks that's ever okay.
I don't
not unless there's something wrong with you.
I'm just saying maybe. Okay, so like there was. Have you ever heard of the Stanley Milgram experiment?
I have heard of it, yes.
Where they would direct people to knowingly hurt people.
Well, and that's the shocking people.
With the shocking people, yes. And people who normally wouldn't do that, when they have someone over their shoulder in a position of authority, in a position of power, that is making them do it or urging them to do it, you'd be surprised at how compliant people are. So that's the only thing that I can figure is maybe because she was in a position of authority, she was she was telling them to do that, so maybe that's why they did it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that they know what's right from wrong. That's the only reason. That's the only thing that I can think why they did it. I have no, but people do strange things.
Here's the thing: they went back and they did it again. And I might understand the first time they were intimidated, and maybe they thought they had to, but they kept going back. They kept going back and doing it again and again and again.
Especially Coy, who kept throwing her around in the basement. And like continually hurting her at the behest of Gertrude.
That's what I don't understand. That's what I don't understand. Kept going back.
Well, the nice thing
and this woman was okay with this boy who kept coming back to beat a child in a basement. Is dating her daughter.
Well, the nice thing about that. The nice thing about Coy is Coy, when he gets out of juvenile hall, is in and out of jail the rest, and I think he died in prison. So I think so that's one silver lining. It doesn't
make up for what he did.
No, it doesn't. But that's one silver lining. If you had,
it doesn't make up for what she did.
No, and the fact that she was able to get a second trial in another town because she said Indianapolis was too prejudiced against her case. You did what you know what you did, and you did what you did willingly. What judge in their right mind is willing to hear this case again? I don't understand that. So,
well, I think that this is one of those things. I'm not going to sit here and try and make excuses for what this woman did. What she did was absolutely fucking horrific. She is an absolute monster. But in dissecting and what we do, going back to like the podcast and being investigators of true crime, of paranormal stuff like that. I think that this had to have started within that little bitty moment when she was 10 years old, when her dad died in front of her, in that horrific, traumatic moment, and her mom snapping at her and being like, what did you do? Because if you listen to everything that just played out, that's the same sentiment she has towards Sylvia over and over again. So I really think all of this was born in that moment. And I think there has to be some type of resentment along the way, PTSD as well, through all the different marriages, miscarriages that she's had. And I think just finally, this woman has just fucking snapped.
Lost it, yeah.
And now she's having to care for these girls that she didn't ask for, but, was like, yeah, I'll take care of them because I'm getting paid to do so. And just, do not get me wrong, her crimes were horrific, but in looking at it and trying to investigate these episodes the way that we do and why people do what they do, really think it was in that moment when her father died in front of her that this was.
Let's look at it from a psychology standpoint. And trust me, I don't want to give her any kind of excuse or reason. what appears interesting to me, if I can even get this out, because I'm choking myself trying to get this said. Sylvia was her.
Mm-hmm.
The mother made Gertrude the target and beat her and all this and so when here you have, Sylvia, who is an innocent, she basically treats her exactly the way that she was treated.
Yeah.
And
it's a lot of
homes with a lot of cyclical abuse, it's generational, and it takes someone to step out and stop that pattern. And I can't stand anything about whenever somebody does stuff to kids. I can't handle that.
Right.
So, but sorry.
It's okay.
You're fine.
But I don't think at any point, and I do think that she snapped. I think that I think perhaps she could have, something was wrong in her brain, because I don't know how any person who is a mother could treat any child like that.
Exactly.
I don't know how you have that in you.
Right. And to remember too, when she was married to John, and he used to beat her about the head. Remember, said she would have weeks of dizzy spells and stuff. So there's the head trauma connection right there too. Like, so maybe that had something to do with it too, where she just, something snapped in her brain after she got beat up so many times. And then she has all that resentment from all of her failed relationships, all of that resentment from her mother. And then her daughter gets pregnant just like she did. So she loves her children so much. She feels like that she can't put that on her daughter. So she finds another target and goes after her and does horrific things to that poor girl.
But that is something that is common in households with generational abuse. There often is a favorite, and there often is a target.
Yeah.
And
right.
Well, I think it touches on, I think what Shelley and I both are trying to say is I have to lean more than what Shelley was saying is and you as well, Ryan was saying projection. I think that Sylvia is her. I think she's taking on the form of her mother, because it is the cyclical thing. And it's just, I hate to say it this way because it's grotesque almost to say it, but Sylvia is the easy target. It's not her daughter. And so she can play out this cyclical abuse of what she had to endure. And in a way I don't know. It's in my head. It's making sense where it's like sometimes the victims, I'm going to say Gertrude, when she was a kid with her mother, still idolize these people in a very extreme, twisted kind of way. And maybe some way that's what she is doing here. When she figured out how easy it is, she continued and went further than her mother ever did with her. I don't.
Well, she doesn't have to answer to anybody because her parents are 1,000 miles away on the carnival circuit. They don't know where she don't know where her parents are. So she has no one she has to answer to, and she is going to do whatever she wants because it is easy for her to do it.
Yeah.
So something I found interesting was that Gertrude didn't do this to her own children, and I did notice this in your story, was that every time that Gertrude was pregnant, she felt like she had some value. She started to make the house tidy, make the meals.
Right.
Maybe that is what gave her pride, was being able to bring life in. Well, these two little lives that walked in through her door, they weren't her lives that she brought in. So therefore, perhaps to her, they didn't have any value. And just, my God, my heart breaks for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's awful. But something I do find interesting is that Jenny does not, she is abused as well, but she does not take near the amount of abuse that Sylvia does.
Well, again, like Shelley just said, there's a target and there's a favorite. Because even in that instance, with these two girls walking in, there's still that dynamic. She's not going to mess with her children. But even though you have two of these children who are walking in from another family, it's still easy to pick a target and a favorite.
Right. Also, something I wanted to mention too, the bed that she slept in was a pile of dirty clothes on the floor. She made them sleep in dirty clothes on the floor. So that just shows you how much value she had in these two girls.
Do we know if the mom and dad ever came back to get Jenny? Do we know?
Jenny was adopted, actually ended up being adopted by the prosecutor in the case. So she got out and she had a good life afterwards because the prosecutor adopted her.
Did the parents ever even find out? I mean,
I'm sure they did, but I mean, I think there's a reason why the prosecutor adopted Jenny and didn't give them back to her parents. So, I don't know. I would assume that they knew because, I mean, it was all over the papers at the time. So I would assume they knew what happened, but the thing is too, is like, I know that they are scared of Gertrude, but like when they went to go and talk to their parents, they could have said something. Like, I don't know why they didn't say anything to their parents. Like, get me the hell away from this woman's insane.
Well, you're at that point. I mean, it's a authoritative figure. You're in front of the authoritative. It's the reason why kids don't say anything when a CPS worker shows up at the house,
because mom and dad are standing right there.
Because mom and dad. That's why they try to split them up so the kids can talk freely.
That's right. There was something I did cut for time though. So someone did. They're old. They had an older sister, and Jenny wrote the older sister, telling the older sister what was happening. And the older sister was like, this seems real over the top. I don't really think that's happening, but whatever. So one day their older sister finds herself in Indianapolis and goes by the address that she was given by Jenny. She goes to the door, knocks on the door. Gertrude comes to the door and says, they can't talk to you because Lester said you can't speak to them. Closes the door in her face. So she waits around outside until Jenny takes the garbage out. She goes to Jenny and is like, hey, and Jenny says, I can't talk to you, and goes back into the house. And then from that interaction, their sister did call a CPS agent. CPS did come out there and talk to did talk to Gertrude. And at the time, Sylvia was in the basement and Jenny was upstairs, and Gertrude made it abundantly clear, you better tell this CPS agent what I told you to tell them or it'll be bad for you. And so Gertrude spins this tale about Jenny running off with boys and says, look, I have the good one right here. And Jenny just kind of nods and agrees with everything she says. So the CPS dropped the case against her. So
my question also becomes, it sounds like she missed a lot of school. Why wasn't truancy officers coming? Because she'd be there for a few days, then she wouldn't be there.
Like, and the teachers, like, why weren't they saying something? The truancy officers,
they had to have seen this.
Adults that could have done something.
This is definitely one of those cases, in my opinion, where the system failed. The system failed. The people who are designed to be the protectors and notice these things. Granted, I'm not saying that I don't believe that they were required to report anything back then.
I don't think they were either.
But still, at the same time, we're talking about adults that are looking at these children every single day,
and
nobody says anything. As an adult, take out, you're a teacher, you're a this, you're a whatever, authoritative figure, whatever. You're a goddamn human. You're a human, and you're an adult. Say something.
Like,
if it doesn't look right.
Clearly the priest noticed because he gave them food when they were at the church. Like, he knew something was up.
Yeah.
So,
and still
what's wrong with all these other adults?
I know. I think this is a very complex case at the end of the day, with what Gertrude herself had to endure on that level. Yes, I feel horrible for her as well. That is awful. Nobody should have to go through that herself. But then to turn around and inflict that kind of pain on somebody, it should never come to that. Unfortunately, I don't believe that there was help that she could have received during that time to be able to work through whatever she was dealing with.
Right.
And I think by the time that Sylvia and Jenny come into the picture, I think that her brain is just too far gone already by being in, what is it, three marriages, all with some form of abuse, 4 miscarriages at that point. I mean, she's got so much childhood trauma, PTSD, and probably postpartum depression, as well as just everyday depression, that, I mean, her mind is probably fucked at this point. And I hate to say it that way, but
she sounds almost as if she has some sort of schizophrenia. The way you kept saying she snaps back and forth, back and forth. And I'm not saying that that's a diagnosis, and I'm not saying people have schizophrenia or would do anything like this. It sounds like this, to me, it sounds like there is some kind of undiagnosed medical disorder of the brain. But I think that plays into it, because go ahead.
We'll say everything I read though when she was in prison, from what the book said, and everything that I saw from where she was in prison, she was a model prisoner. Like, she didn't have nothing like that ever happened.
There were
again.
Consequences in prison.
Well, that's true. Yeah, she didn't have any consequences with the girls. You're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to yell that, but that's consequences in prison.
Yeah.
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 She had to answer to someone. And she might not have had her triggers there. Who knows what would trigger this?
True.
Right. And I don't know if, because I'm sure at that time, they're definitely not looking at, let's evaluate her while she's in prison, because at that time, you just go to prison. You did something wrong, you go to prison. There's no one looking at what.
We're talking psychiatry is still so far in infancy at that point that's what I'm saying. And I don't think that she had anybody she could have reached out to be able to help her with anything she went through to keep her from doing something like this.
Right.
Unfortunately.
I mean, God help her if she had, I don't know how she treated her grandkids when she got out. God help them. I don't, who knows?
Why would anyone ever allow her to be around children? Why?
I don't know. She should never have been in the first place. And it's terrible. And I hate, I do not feel like Sylvia Likens got the justice that she deserved.
No.
She did not. That poor girl was literally tortured to death by a crazed woman that should have been in jail for the rest of her life.
I agree.
But she was able to get out and live a good 5 years with her family.
No.
There's no reason that should have happened.
No.
Period.
I think we're all almost in agreement on this. I think this is just such a huge, complex case that it would be so hard to say where it happened, when it happened, or why it happened.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a doozy, man. Like I said, when I started reading, I got further and further into it. I was like, oh no. Oh God, oh no. And it, trust me, like I said, I cleaned it up. It's way worse than what I told you. So if you want to read the book, it's called Torture Mom by Ryan Green. He is a really good true crime author.
No, so I'm not reading that book. I'm sorry.
If you want to, it's very, very tough.
But, nope. No.
Well, and with that, Blake, I have a stomach ache. Do you want to tell them everything they need to know?
Absolutely. But before we do our sign-offs, I do want to add this to the end of our episode, since this was such a heavy topic. Guys, if you are facing something like this at home, the National Abuse Hotline number is 800-799-7233. You can also text BEGIN, BEGIN, to 88788. You can also Google that if you need to as well. That's where I pulled it from. But there are the numbers for you if you need help. Do never be afraid to reach out.
No.
Get the help that you need if you are dealing with something like this.
100%.
On that note, let me tell you a few announcements let's end it on a little higher note than Ryan just put us through.
This is only water. It needs to be something stronger.
Sorry.
Well, do not forget that After Dark with EVP Season 3 is fully out on Paraflix Paranormal Plus, as well as Season 1 and Season 2. We had 7 episodes this last season, ending with our return trip to Yorktown Memorial Hospital, so make sure you go and check that out. You can watch Paraflix on Amazon Fire, Roku TV, Apple TV, iOS, and Google Play. For you audio listeners, you're going to use the link in our show notes, or everybody else can go, or you can go with everybody else to our Facebook page tomorrow morning, which is Wednesday, to sign up. You will see a Linktree link, and there you will find the Paraflix link, and you want to use our code AFTERDARK25 for 25% off your annual subscription, which I think makes it like $37.50 for the entire year. Lots of great content. Also included in that link tree is our Patreon page. Our Patreon is the fastest and easiest way to directly support the show. For just $5 a month, you are going to unlock well over 400 Patreon exclusive videos, which you will not get anywhere else. Your support goes directly to the show and helps us keep bringing these ghostly and true crime adventures to you week after week. And best of all, this price is never going to change. You get the pre and post broadcast, which is the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this live episode, where we dive even deeper. Probably going to talk shit about this later. Had debates, show our goofy self. If you want to hear what happened at 2 separate Christmas parties this last weekend, go check it out. We also have never before seen investigation footage from places like Squirrel Cage Jail, Hill House Manor, McIntyre Villa, including Dirty Estes methods, which are just fun. And don't forget, we offer a 7-day free trial, so you can check it out all before committing. So come over to Patreon and become a member of the EVP family. Make sure to follow us on all those social media channels as well. That is also within our Linktree link. Just click the icons at the top, or you can go to each platform, search everything vaguely paranormal, and look for that green sound wave. And to those audio listeners, remember, you can catch us live on video to see our lovely faces every Tuesday at 8 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, we want to thank everybody for all of your support. Every like, comment, share, and download helps us to go further and further and keep these adventures going. So make sure to tell your families about this episode around the Christmas. No, not this episode. Tell them about us around the Christmas table whenever you are out there celebrating Christmas. And remember, if you have a story, comment, question you'd like to share with us, it's going to be sent to the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube page.
So, guys, we want to thank you for tuning in to another weekly edition of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. I am Ryan Roberts, and these are my partners in the paranormal, Mr. Blake Smith and Miss Shelley Pruitt, and we will see y'all next Tuesday. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all. Got to get to the credits.